the great conservative movement of America and of our time. A brush fire of freedom is being lit all over this country. We, as an irate, tireless American populace, will overcome the few radical leftists that control the levers of power today. Joe Biden's failed economic policies has given us inflation like you can't believe, and the border is in disarray.
It's amazing how few of the people commenting on this have actually bothered to go see what's happening. Well, Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona actually went to the border.
Biggs, where's Andy? Boy, oh boy, Andy. There's a guy. He's tough.
Hello, everyone. I'm Andy Biggs, Congressman from Arizona's 5th Congressional District. Thanks for joining me on our live podcast. It's a semi-regular podcast that we call What's the Biggs Idea? We have a great guest with me today. He recently testified in Congress. He is Mike Benz. Mike is a former Trump State Department official specializing in international communications. He's also the founder of Foundation for Freedom Online. It's a free speech watchdog dedicated to freedom of speech, expression, and the free exchange of ideas online. And we're going to talk a little bit about things that I think actually cut across the party lines, because I know that I've worked with some of my colleagues across the aisle on these issues that we're going to talk about today. It's really interesting. And so we're going to begin with Mike. Let's talk about FISA, its reauthorization, in my opinion, the grossly unfortunate defeat of the warrant requirement before surveillance. So tell everybody please, a little bit about it, what FISA is, the abuses that were there, who was spied on. I mean, we've heard both sides of the aisle, and then let's talk about warrants. So I'm going to open that platform up for you.
Yeah, and thank you, Congressman, for having me here, and also for your incredible leadership on this issue. You were really the tip of the spear on the FISA issue, and it gets to the heart and soul of the dirty tricks capacity of our national security state and our foreign policy establishment to be able to rig the political process and to be able to rig the ultimate foreign policy set by this country by sicking powers that are traditionally reserved for our intelligence agencies against hostile foreign threats, against domestic political actors who fly in the face of their foreign policy agenda. So I think Senator Mike Lee said it best when he described FISA as federal investigators stalking Americans. And this is this idea of a totally streamlined process for surveillance and spying and wiretapping and getting your entire digital footprint, essentially, including the web pages that you access and being able to now, with this new reauthorization, when you go to a hotel, look at the websites you access through the Wi-Fi at the hotel. I mean, it's top to bottom, soup to nuts, an entire 24/7 domestic spying operation. And it's done through a cute, clever trick that has a 100-year history of corruption in this country, which is the idea of something called counterintelligence. So our CIA was created in 1947 to be able to do intelligence work, a department of dirty tricks that would be able to play a lot rougher with foreign nations and foreign citizens than the constitutional protections afforded to U.S. citizens, because ostensibly it was projecting our foreign influence abroad for the benefit of the citizens of the homeland. And the deal that was struck is that would never come home. But there's a cute trick that allows intelligence operations to come home, which is you put the word counter in front of it. And you say, well, we're not spying, we're not doing intelligence operations against our own people. We're doing counterintelligence operations against foreign actors who may or may not be associated with domestic folks. And we get to then spy on our own people as though they were foreigners. And they can do this without a warrant, without probable cause, without even having to look at the case through FISA. And essentially how this works is if if anyone at FBI counterintelligence or any of the other law enforcement or national security equities decide in their sole and unfettered discretion that you may or may not have, that you may have links to a foreign entity, then they get to pry open your life, Truman Show style, and surround your entire life with cameras looking in on you. And this is really at the heart and soul of what's happening right now with the struggle on Ukraine policy and our foreign assistance budget and things like this, which is that the main threat to the foreign policy establishment and their corporate and financial stakeholders is that Americans will vote not to fund their initiatives anymore. They cannot fund their wars. They cannot fund their foreign influence operations or foreign assistance unless Americans grant them hundreds of billions of dollars, and what will ultimately probably be $1 trillion, for example, with this Ukraine. If that funding dries up, the foreign policy dies on the vine. And so what they need to do is they need to rig the political process in this country so that anybody who opposes that money and that jurisdictional mandate for endless empire can be taken out easily through a Russiagate scandal accompanied by the dirty tricks capacity of FISA. This is what COINTELPRO was, by the way. The co in COINTEL was counterintelligence. And so, this was something that Hoover did, and it's alive and well today, and it's being trained on people who want the best for this country.
So let's break it down just a little bit more in two areas, because a lot of people may not understand how the counterintelligence arm, let's say of the FBI, for instance, which the Inspector General's report noted that they had conducted literally millions and millions of what they call queries, or in normal policing terms, we would call them searches. So they've conducted millions of these. And then in 1 year alone, they had done 290,000 warrantless, expansive searches, right? So, and that was on everybody from BLM type folks to J6 type folks to political donors to political campaigns. It was just really incredibly broad, and they did it without warrants. And so thus, and quite frankly, a number of us have been working for years trying to get warrants, and I'll cover that in a second. But those individuals get caught up in something called an incidental collection. So while ostensibly the government agents are looking over here at foreign actors, if you have any kind of intersection with those foreign actors, they collect your information. That's an incidental collection, and the FBI guys, NSA did some, CIA did less than NSA, but they would actually then turn around and do the search on Americans' information that they had gained. So you want to expand on that, Mike, a little bit?
That's exactly right. And, this dates back to General Michael V. Hayden when he was the head of the CIA. There's a great documentary on this called The Good American about Bill Binney, who was the whistleblower who exposed kind of the origins of this bulk collection program, where the national security state can reach into every footprint that you leave about your life and identity. But part of the issue is once you have this incidental bulk collection and database to be able to find out anything about anyone to the extent that there's a hypothetical touch point through three jumps to somebody living in another country, is that there's a saying, 3 felonies a day, which is this idea that we have so many laws in our penal code. There's so many sort of esoteric tripwires that you can inadvertently trip day to day, just going about your business. That once you train these spy powers on a domestic political target, it's very easy to go on a fishing expedition to find something, anything, anywhere, and then also be able to then run that through non-NSA channels, for example, or non-FBI or non-CIA channels, to their friends in the media, or to their friends in the think tank world, or to their friends on a congressional committee, or staffers there, to be able to launder a scandal against somebody that started with essentially a warrantless FISA tap. And we saw this happen, essentially with none other than the head of counterintelligence for the FBI, Peter Strzok.
Right.
Peter Strzok was the guy. I mean, this is the caliber of people who are tasked with that unbelievable, almost godlike discretion to determine whether or not a person is a free American citizen with constitutional protections, or essentially a hostile foreign spy in the eyes of their own government. Peter Strzok was the person who folks will recall, famously was, declared that they were working on an insurance policy to stop Trump from being elected or stop him from being inaugurated. He essentially, had an open air plot that was revealed in text messages to try to undermine the democratic process in this country using FBI dirty tricks. And this was the guy who was the head of counterintelligence,
Right.
on top of it.
Yeah, and I just make a couple comments on that. So that's what the Mueller investigation turned up. It was confirmed by the Durham investigation, and it was also confirmed by an independent House investigation. So, I mean, the problem is Strzok was the dude that was supposed to be, he, as you say, he had almost deity-like powers because he controlled the counterintelligence program of the FBI, and the FBI abused that system so badly that we finally had a shot at getting some meaningful reforms to FISA. And one of those, and I'm just going to talk about this briefly, was the warrant requirement, right? So people like Zoe Lofgren, a Democrat from Northern California, Silicon Valley, Jerry Nadler, Democrat from Manhattan, Pramila Jayapal, Democrat from Seattle, they were on my bill because I had the original FISA reform bill, but they would also join me on the warrant amendment, and they were there with people like Jim Jordan and Warren Davidson, and quite frankly, Warren, myself, and Lofgren and Jayapal and Nadler. We've all been trying to get at the same location, and so my bill had tremendous bipartisan, bicameral support, right? So we actually thought we had a shot to get it through. And I got to say this because, Mike, I think you probably watched this. We had the votes, and then the Intelligence Committee chairman created an international incident, right? I don't know if you remember this. So what happened is the speaker pulled the bill because the IC chair, the International Intelligence Committee chairman, said, "Oh my goodness, we have this horrible international incident we need to brief everybody on." And I can't talk about it because it was a classified briefing, other than to say, and I'll quote or paraphrase Jim Himes, who is the ranking member, who said, "This basically is a nothing burger. We see this type of thing all the time." But what it did is it killed the momentum we had to pass it. And so the warrant requirement went down on a 212 to 212 vote, with the speaker doing something he doesn't usually do, and that's cast a vote, and he killed the bill. And so that's the shame of it. And so we lost the warrant requirement. But not only did they pass FISA, you touched on it. The Republicans actually, with some Democrats, actually expanded the scope of FISA. So the sphere of collection expanded by 3 big buckets. So where almost everybody now is going to be surveilled almost at will by the police state apparatus. And so, Mike, last word on that, because I want to get to a couple other things as well.
Yeah, well, part of the issue is, the civil war, as I sometimes refer to it, within the GOP leads to a totally divergent interests for sort of cynical, self-serving reasons for folks, I think, who are principally concerned with the foreign policy side of the Republican Party, as opposed to domestic affairs or domestic prosperity, which is that the foreign policy side of the GOP is currently being supplanted in many respects by the GOP's increasing popularity of folks who want to put America first and who want to focus on domestic priorities rather than foreign policy to the extent that it was in previous Republican administrations. And so you have a deeply entrenched set of Republicans who occupy, I think, very senior positions within Republican Party leadership who are not going to be affected in the slightest by FISA, because again, FISA is a political weapon to take out anybody who opposes the foreign policy agenda. Like, for example, if you don't want the endless funding for Ukraine, okay, well, why don't you want it? Are you being backed by the Russians? Right. We better find out. Boom, FISA, just like that. Just because you had 1 million followers on Twitter and you said, "Hey, I don't think that we should pass Ukraine funding." Well, why is that? Now you've got a predicate for FISA, and this is a way of, as I see it, cleaning up house and trying to purge any sort of nationalist or populist surge within the GOP proportional representation, in order to get that faction under control and essentially bring back the GOP to the style of internationalist Republicans, a la a Nikki Haley type figure. And I think FISA is one of the tricks in their toolkit to accomplish that.
Well, let's go to a different topic now. The Judiciary Subcommittee on Weaponization has released a report. And I'll just tell you that they've done several reports, one of which was on the weaponization of the financial structure in the country. Another one is this pressure on big tech, where we now have a treasure trove of documents between big tech administrators and the Biden administration, where they were trying to actually have impact in many ways, and they were ordering things to be taken down. And so anything that they determined to be misinformation or disinformation, they ordered to be brought down, even though now what we've discovered is much of the information that they ordered to be taken down turns out it was actually accurate. But in any event, that type of censorship is really dangerous in a constitutional republic. So let's analyze that. Tell us. Just give us a little background on the weaponization of censorship of big tech.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary story. It's one that I've been covering for about 8 years now, and it's at the heart of it. You have a situation where a lot of people sort of look up at the censorship that they face, and they see. I give the analogy: they look up after they've been squashed and stepped on by big tech, and they see the boot heel of Mark Zuckerberg, and they say, "Oh, Facebook censored me, YouTube censored me, Twitter censored me." And what they don't see is the giant above Mark Zuckerberg, which is the U.S. government putting its boot heel, squashing Mark Zuckerberg to squash you. And this happened because they lost the 2016 U.S. presidential election. I mean, technically, it starts a little bit before that. It starts with the Crimea annexation in Ukraine in 2014. This is when the transatlantic national security state, NATO, got into in a very serious way into a perceived need for military control over media, and the creation of a censorship mechanism funneled through governments, national security states, to create a liaison relationship and pressure on the tech companies to censor what at the time they were describing as either pro-Russia talking points in Central and Eastern Europe, or populist or nationalist political parties in the UK, such as with Brexit, or in Italy, such as with Matteo Salvini, or in Spain, such as with the Vox Party, or in Germany, such as with the AfD Party, because those parties were all running on planks that were neutral on foreign policy with Russia at a time when the State Department was pursuing to get their governments to sanction Russia after the Crimea annexation and to devote funding to the military reconquest of the Donbass, which was a breakaway state. And so you had our Department of Defense, our State Department, our CIA, and the swarm of tens of thousands of U.S. government-funded soft power institutions and cutouts all descend on social media institutions, again, beginning in that 2014 to 2016 period, principally concentrated in CEE, Central and Eastern Europe, from Germany into Ukraine. But then when Brexit happened in 2016, it expanded to Western Europe, and NATO formally declared the month after Brexit this new hybrid warfare capacity to do this work. And then in November 2016, when Trump won the election, it was that was the end of any sort of idea that the national security state could allow free speech on the internet. And very quickly after November 2016, this same foreign-facing Department of Dirty Tricks power that we imbued, same thing with the FISA, these dirty tricks that we have to be able to interfere in the elections and in the political processes and in the media institutions of foreign countries, was fully brought to bear at home. Again, starting with a sort of Russiagate predicate, this idea that for 2.5 years, it was the consensus opinion of our intelligence community that the 2016 presidential election wasn't even legitimate because it was Russian interference on social media. And then that the entire campaign may have been essentially a puppet of Putin. And so initially this censorship infrastructure was installed at Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Reddit and all the different 15 different platforms and forums here in the US, through this idea that the CIA had to be able to work with the tech companies' content moderation teams to stop Russian propaganda or Russian disinformation. And so a vast apparatus was built. They call it the whole of society model, where the government spearheads private sector companies, media institutions to do flagging work, and civil society organizations, meaning universities, nonprofits, activists, researchers, foundations, into a whole of society unit to censor Russian disinformation. And then a funny thing happened, which is in the summer of 2019. Mueller essentially choked on the stand and revealed that he had no cards up his sleeve. The entire thing was totally unsubstantiated. And so they had a moment in time in the summer of 2019 where, in theory, that entire apparatus, which was targeting millions of Trump supporters by proxy, by falsely, saying that they were, labeling them as pro-Russia voices or things like this, they fully dropped they could have disbanded that entire censorship architecture that the CIA and the FBI and DHS had set up because the foreign predicate had fallen away. But they did a very dirty trick, which we are living in the aftermath of, which is they pulled off what I call the foreign to domestic switcheroo. They said, well, actually, dis, and malinformation is not just a threat to democracy when it comes from a hostile foreign nation state projecting its influence here. It's also a threat to democracy when, in fact, it's an even bigger one when it comes from our own domestic institutions. And the problem was it took too long for the Republican Party and for moderate, centrist, or reasonable Democrats to be able to understand this apparatus, because it reached a point of maturity between 2019 and 2022 that was absolutely astounding. The staggering growth once they did this as a democracy promotion program. And again,
just to interject real quick, Mike, what facilitated or accelerated, I should say, what you're talking about, the growth and cemented in the establishment of this apparatus was COVID, and the ability then was present to actually control narrative, not just here in the U.S. but throughout the world, and it was used relentlessly. So whereas and we saw that, and that's what much of the documentation that we've seen in the weaponization committee is to control that narrative. But go ahead, please.
That's exactly right. The two most astounding and by far the biggest, most censored events in essentially world history, because this system has ensnared hundreds of millions of posts. I mean, it's the most sophisticated, I think, of anything human civilization has ever seen in terms of how AI can detect narratives by using keyword searches and training machine learning models and hiring thousands of academics and computer scientists to refine these and then sell them or license them to the platforms. So COVID-19 and the 2020 election were the two most censored events in human history. And they scaled this apparatus that I'm describing, openly plotted after the 2020 election to scale this apparatus to quote every sensitive policy issue, from climate to immigration to abortion to Ukraine. We even saw that happen with DHS in 2021 when the Biden administration took over, and they began to call basically all of these categories critical infrastructure. And so if you expressed misinformation about that critical infrastructure in the cyber realm, i.e. online, you were committing, in DHS's eyes, under their own definition, a cyber attack on U.S. critical infrastructure, necessitating the intervention of censorship. And DHS and FBI and CIA and all of their cutouts through the Stanford Internet Observatory and University of Washington and Atlanta Council and Graphika and the hundreds of others, they basically got rid of the whole concept of humanity even being involved in this. The reference here was cyber threat actor. That's what you were. You were no longer a U.S. citizen talking about whether or not you think there should be a lockdown or whether masks work. You were a cyber threat actor carrying out a cyber attack in the form of misinformation on critical infrastructure. If you said, I don't think mail-in ballots are a safe and reliable form of voting, you were designated by DHS as a cyber threat actor, undermining the integrity of U.S. elections by delegitimizing the processes on which elections are predicated.
So Mike, I want to interject here so people understand. Whether you think mail-in ballots are good or bad, that's an opinion you are entitled to hold and you are entitled to express. Whether you think COVID-19 lockdowns were effective and good or detrimental and bad, that was an opinion you could have and you should be able to share under our U.S. Constitution. Well, we believe those are inherent rights, that they're just recognized by the Constitution, designed to be protected by the government as opposed to encroached on. But what you've described and what the Weaponization Committee has brought forward, and what other investigations in the House Oversight Committee and the House Judiciary Committee, and even in Homeland Security, they indicate pretty clearly that our own government has a massive apparatus where they can try to suppress what you're putting out there on the social media platforms. And the reason I had to cut off is because we're about out of time. But I mean, this is so interesting. But I'm going to give you the last 30 seconds to give us where you think we go from here.
Well, a great starting point would be Brazil, because what's happening right now with the Brazilian government's censorship apparatus, also in the EU with the Digital Services Act in Australia, is there's a much larger superstructure to this all, and where it all comes from, why it was that DHS was able to create this, and where the idea for DHS's censorship operation to censor COVID and to censor elections and all of this came from. And it comes from a network concentrated around our State Department and our CIA and the interstitial institutions that sit between our overt and covert diplomacy, such as USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy. And they are currently working assiduously in 140 countries right now as we speak to get foreign countries to pass laws or judicial edicts within their own countries to crack down on U.S. companies in order to censor the speech on their platforms, in order to rig the elections in foreign countries. And so the U.S. State Department and its swarm army is working with the Brazilian government it's working with the EU government, it's working with the Australian government in order to get around the US First Amendment. They see an international exchange of ideas between populism in the US, populism in Brazil, populism in Europe. And they are creating a worldwide global government censorship apparatus to permanently destroy any sort of semblance of private sector self-determination over content moderation policies. And what hangs in the balance is whether or not we even have such a thing as private media or private free speech in this country at all.
Yeah, Mike, this has been fascinating. And just quite frankly, you saying that under the rubric that DHS, and particularly the FBI, has put together, and the Attorney General, you'd be considered to be a domestic terrorist. And thus they would be able to go after you and have access to all of your data. And so the attack is on your freedoms, your privacy, and actually the essence of who you are as a human child of God and citizen of the United States. It's all under attack. And I wish we had more time. This is why I wanted to bring you on. You testified, got to see you testify, and I knew that there's so much more you could talk about. And even today there'd be more. And so we didn't get to explore everything fully, but I would encourage everybody. How do they follow you? How do they get in your social media and your website?
Yeah, best way is on X, Twitter, at Mike Benz Cyber, all one word, Mike Benz Cyber. Our foundation is Foundation for Freedom Online. We do cutting edge investigative reports there. And Congressman, again, I want to express my extraordinary gratitude for you taking up these issues and being tip of the spear on them. That requires a level of bravery and principle that I think is totally exemplary in this space. And I think my hope, and I think everyone in the audience's hope, is that we can multiply the forces around you, both inside and on the outside, in order to send our spirit energy to you and to lead this fight from within the House.
Thank you. That's very kind. And I'll continue working with my friends across the aisle. I mean, there are people both sides of the aisle that are right there with us that want to get this done. So we'll get to keep working there. Thank you. Thanks everybody who watched today. Please check out Mike. Get more information. He's all over this issue, which is actually one of the most fundamental, basic issues of our time. And I say thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody. And with that, God bless you. And we'll see you next time on my